And as he walked toward me down the aisle, the first words out of his mouth were, "You got to be Will Rogers."
Welcome back to Everyone Has a Story, true tales from everyday life. Well, today's story is about an extraordinary West Virginia farmer who in his everyday life is an agricultural engineer and a university professor. But in his alter persona, Randall brings to life the warmth and the humor of Will Rogers, Cherokee actor, humorist, and philosopher. This Will Rogers look-alike makes you feel like you're in the presence of the real Will Rogers reincarnate. More at home on a tractor seat than in the lecture dais. Randall, as Will Rogers says, I never met a farmer I don't like. Here's Randall Reeder and Will Rogers.
Well, I was born in Western West Virginia, and that was in 1943. Born on July the 4th, and people have been celebrating with fireworks ever since. I grew up on a farm, and my grandparents both had farms, and they had horses. So I grew up with horses, and I learned how to work with horses and watch my granddad's mow hay with a horse. And when I was 8 years old, my dad got the first tractor, and I was a Ferguson 20, TO20, and that's how I really got excited about the farm machinery. I got into tractor driving really quick. I was never into the animals like a lot of young people, 4-Hers and FFA are. It wasn't like I was out there petting the calf and loving the like so many 4-H kids do, and learn their showmanship skills and polish it up and brush it and everything like that. That just wasn't me. I was machinery. Well, an agricultural engineer works as an engineer with agricultural topics such as designing farm equipment, designing farm machinery, farm tractors. It's a very diverse field because we also work in designing drainage systems and irrigation systems in agriculture. Also building earthen dams is another area. In earlier days, there was a lot of emphasis on electrification of farms. The electronic equipment today, it's become all the electronics and automation that's on farm machinery is a good example of one thing that agricultural engineers do. In many ways, an agricultural engineer can be components of mechanical engineering, electrical engineering, electronics. So that kind of covers most of the areas. Without really thinking about it, just the fact that I grew up on the farm and liked it, it was kind of natural that I wanted to be in agriculture in one way or another. So I knew about engineering, civil engineering, mechanical engineering, but it was right after I turned 16, I was in the West Virginia State 4-H Tractor Operators Contest, and lo and behold, the person in charge of it was an extension agricultural engineer from West Virginia University. That's the first time I'd ever heard ag engineer, so that set my career right there. In agricultural engineering, there's usually only one college in each state that has agricultural engineering as a curriculum, and that was West Virginia University. It wasn't like I was going out visiting half a dozen colleges and universities like kids do today, dragging their parents all over the country to decide on a school to go to. It was pretty much set. For a master's degree, I developed or designed and put together a hillside fertilizer spreader. I designed that. I actually got a patent, but never did anything with it. But it got me a master's degree. I think the most fun and probably the most fulfilling parts of my life, well, number one was square dancing. when I was young, I just loved square dancing. I wasn't into the rock and roll and jitterbug or whatever, but I really loved square dancing. And then, of course, driving a tractor. Any time I could spend on a tractor was the best days of my life. And now it's being with family members and friends and having good times visiting with them. And I'll throw in time spent at events with professional speakers is also a wonderful time. And I love square dancing. And at West Virginia University, I was already a grad student, and we went to a square dance. They had one every week during the summer. And in square dancing, some of them are called mixers. So you start out with a couple, but then you change partners as you go around. And when the music ends, whoever you end up with is your partner then for the next dance. Well, every guy who goes to a square dance really hopes that he ends up with a pretty girl at the end of that mixer. And bingo, I did. And so in 2 months we got married. So that went very quick, and we've been married ever since, 55 years. I got into the Ohio Speakers Forum in 1981, which was a chapter of the National Speakers Association. And once I got into it, then there were a number of people that I really looked up to and learned from in those beginning years. And I'm still an active member, both nationally and at the state. And nationally, the NSA is going to celebrate their 50th anniversary in Orlando this July. I grew up as a Methodist. My family was Methodist, and I'm still go to the Methodist church. Even when there's airplanes flying over, I'm still a Methodist. I think I was fortunate. I grew up as a Methodist. We went to church my whole life. There was never a time when we never went to church. So I'm glad that I'm a Methodist. Now, I'm glad I'm a Christian. I don't mean to say that others aren't just as religious. In fact, I would make very clear that I don't believe there is any one religion that is the religion. In 1996, I was already in the National Speaker Association. I think it was the second year I had ever attended the national convention, which was in Orlando, Florida. And a friend was going to introduce me to a professional speaker from Oklahoma, Dale Minnick. And as he walked toward me down the aisle, the first words out of his mouth were, "You got to be Will Rogers." And I didn't have my hair like this, but he was persistent, and that's what got me into becoming Will Rogers today. He said, "You got to go to Claremore, Oklahoma, to visit the Will Rogers Memorial Museum." He said, "You'll find out that you should be Will Rogers." And I finally got out there on a weekend and just walked around all day Sunday in the museum. And the volunteers told me at the end of the day, said, "Everybody thinks you're Will Rogers Jr." So that proved the point that I actually looked like Will. So that was the whole point of it. I looked like Will, so therefore I was a natural to develop some speaking as Will Rogers. It's not like Elvis, where there's a million Elvises. There were only a half a dozen or so other people doing Will Rogers, and the difference for me was I was in agriculture. Will Rogers was a rancher, so I had that natural connection, and I looked like Will, where most of the others did not. They wouldn't even claim that they looked like Will. So that's what got me started in it, and then I decided to start writing in Will Rogers style. The manager at the museum had given me all of his books of all of his writings, so I could look up Ohio or Arizona or cattle and see where the references were in his writing. So that's what got me started on it, and I started writing then in his style, and I thought, well, I'll include a quote or two of Will in each of those. Started that 25 years ago, and I'm up to a little over 1,150 of those weekly comments. I think based on what I knew, I think Randall Reeder was a pretty nice guy. He grew up in church, so it wasn't like he had to be totally transformed to become a nice person. Now, I'm pretty well known through all my time in the movies and writing articles and giving talks that people knew I was a pretty nice guy too. Even though I lived in Hollywood all those years and made movies, in fact, I joke about it. I'm the only man in Hollywood that came out of the movies with the same wife he went in with, and I think Randall Reeder's the same way. But the point is, I don't think anybody had to be embarrassed to say, I like Will Rogers. I think I'd like to be like Will Rogers, that there's nothing in my past that would embarrass anybody. So I probably had some influence on Randall Reeder. I probably made him a better writer and probably a more enjoyable speaker, adding some more humor and making it a little bit more loosey-goosey, not so stilted like maybe he was speaking as an engineer on soil compaction and other really exciting agricultural topics. Well, I had plenty of opportunities both in vaudeville and then obviously in the Ziegfeld Follies and then speaking as a professional speaker to interact with audiences, and I loved interacting with audiences. I used my lasso to a good extent there. Sometimes I'd drag people up on the stage. I had a way that I could present an important opinion or on a controversial topic, and I would put in enough humor. I'd never attack anybody personally. I'd never attack anybody for being old or bald or anything like that. I never told a mother-in-law joke, for example. But I could always throw in something humorous that would make what I had said in a serious way, even if you disagreed with it, that you'd say, he's funny, but he's telling us something and he's worth listening to, even if it's the opposing opinion. Well, Will Rogers was at his high point in the 1920s and then into the 30s. And you probably know the stock market crashed in October 1929. That just totally changed things from being a booming economy to the Great Depression. Will Rogers was a lifelong Democrat. His famous line was, "I don't belong to any organized political party. I'm a Democrat." But in 1932, he was totally supportive of Franklin Delano Roosevelt as being the likely nominee for the presidency. He liked Herbert Hoover. He respected what Herbert Hoover tried to do as president and just felt that he was the victim of circumstances that happened in 1929, and that he felt President Hoover did the best he could and just couldn't manage it. So he supported FDR. And Roosevelt got in, and in the first 100 days, man, he just totally transformed thinking in the country. And Will Rogers supported that. What you'd call today very liberal policies, giving welfare, I'll just use that phrase, to people who were out of work. And the unemployment was 25% back then. We get concerned today if unemployment is 6 or 8%, but 25%. So the programs that FDR put in, Will was totally supportive of them. Now the change came though after a couple of years. So let's say 1934, that Will thought Roosevelt and the Democrats were going too far in being generous with tax money. Will felt that an able-bodied person should work. Now, we'll support you, but you need to have a job. You need to do something worthwhile to earn that money. You can't just sit, in today's vernacular, you can't just sit on the couch in front of the TV. So he separated himself just a little bit from those totally liberal policies at that time. Now, some of this, you're wondering, how do I know that? Well, his son, Jim Rogers, told me that back about 1998, that the will had changed a little bit, and by the time he died, he was a little bit more, not quite so liberal, let me phrase it that way. Is Will going to like me for the rest of my life? I really hope so. And when I write something, I look at it and read it over, and if I think, I don't think Will would have said that. I don't think he would have written that, and I don't include it. I delete it or I change it. I try to be more neutral. Will wasn't as generous or as liberal as the Democrats were in the 1930s, and as you move on through the decades, I don't think I'll get in trouble saying this, Democrats have changed. You go back to 1960, people comment that President Kennedy was definitely not as liberal as what we see with President Biden today and the Democrats in Congress. So just keep that contrast in mind, that the Democrats have changed also. And I always also point out, well, Will Rogers was Oklahoman. He was born and raised in Indian Territory, but he was an Oklahoma boy, and would have, if he had lived longer, their plans were to move back to Claremore, Oklahoma. He had already bought 20 acres. I think Will would have probably been one of the first to move out of Hollywood in California and headed back home to Oklahoma. I've had a lot of fun in my life, and I think one thing I've learned from that is to be kind. Be kind to your friends, be kind to your family, be kind to people you just met, because who knows, you may become friends with them or work in business with them for whatever reason. So even if I'm walking down the hall, when I was working in an office, I would always smile at somebody that came by, and it made me feel good if they smiled back. If you talk about one life lesson, I think it's take advantage of your opportunities that you get in life. If somebody gives you another idea or an opportunity that might even be totally different than what you're currently doing, and if you find out you might be pretty good at it, so take advantage of that to progress to something higher up or better in your life, or more fun. I guess a closing comment I would make in looking at future generations, thinking of young people today, I'd suggest they use common horse sense. And by that I mean, listen to your parents and your grandparents and other relatives and friends who care for you and want the best things in your life, as opposed to taking advice from TikTok and maybe from your friends in school. And I think that common sense will help you out if you just ask yourself a question. Again, I'm talking to young folks here. Is it safe? Does it make sense? Or could it kill me? And I think if you think of it that way, that our young people, and I've got wonderful granddaughters and young people that I know who already do this. And I think others would be well advised to follow similar advice, to look to your parents, your grandparents, and anybody else, a minister, anybody else who really cares about your future and wants you to succeed. And they'll help take care of you and keep you safe. Well, a fellow asked me a while back, I said, Will, what constitutes a life well spent? Well, I think that love and admiration of your fellow man is all anybody can expect. Now, I would never pretend to tell somebody else how to live their life, but the words that I try to follow myself is live your life so when you lose it, you're ahead. I don't mean to be ahead in money. Well, that's better than being broke. I mean to be ahead in important things. Things like generosity, integrity, compassion, friends. Well, when I die, my epitaph or whatever those words are that you see on gravestones is going to read, "I joked about every prominent man of my time, but I never met a man I didn't like." And I'm so proud of that I can hardly wait to die, so it can be engraved. And when you come around my grave in Claremore, Oklahoma, you'll probably find me sitting there, proudly reading it. Now, I never met a man I didn't like. If I was saying that today, I would say I never met a person I didn't like. And the key word there is met. I never met a person I didn't like. I found that if you give everybody a fair first chance to be a friend, they start liking you. And when people like you, then your whole world brightens up, and you'll find that you'll have all the friends that you can handle at that time. So I think that's the words of wisdom I would leave for Randall Reeder and anybody else today is when you meet somebody, don't prejudge them ahead of time. Give everybody a fair chance to be a friend, and you'll find out that you'll have all the love and admiration that you can handle.